Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Magic with Zuby. My name is Zuby, and if you're brand new to this show, the show is all about a little well-known card game called Magic the Gathering. So it's been almost about a month since I've done an episode here, and I do apologize for that. I did mention before that I'll be pulling back on episodes and not releasing them all the time, but I really didn't think I'd only release one in a month. That's due to work has decided to all of a sudden get crazy near the end of the year. But you don't want to hear about that. You want to hear about today's topic. Has Magic the Gathering become more complex? Before we get into that, let me just get some announcements out of the way. This show is sponsored by Cardsphere.com, the best place to buy, trade, and sell your Magic singles and sealed product. And also sponsored by Alter Sleeves. Altersleeves.com, use promo code MagicWithZuby on checkout, and you can get, a little percentage and, help the show out as well, too. And also, you can find me on Twitter, Instagrams, TikToks, Facebooks, all the social medias now. Just search for Magic with Zuby and on YouTube and everywhere where you get your podcasts, you can find this. So I will say, if you are an audio listener only, this is going to be a little bit of a hard episode to listen to because I've got really pretty pictures. This subject has Magic the Gathering become more complex. Yeah, it can still be for audio listeners only, but I made a really cool PowerPoint and it's pretty. So, if you are just an audio only listener, do yourself a favor and check out the Magic with Zuby YouTube channel. Just search Magic with Zuby on YouTube and you will find this video and, check it out. No harm done. See my pretty PowerPoint that I made. I spent, a little bit of time making this PowerPoint, and I will have to say I kind of enjoyed it because this is like my third or fourth PowerPoint I've ever done. I think I've done one or two for work, and this is my second one done for content creation. My first one being that Pathfinder versus D&D comparison, and that still gets a shit ton of views. It's awesome. But So check it out. Check out the video and check out my pretty little PowerPoint. And we're going to get into it right now. All right, so we are posing the question today. Has Magic the Gathering become more complex? Why isn't There we go. Boom. We are professionals here. We know what we're doing. So I am posing the question today, has Magic the Gathering become more complex? And this question really started with on Magic for Normies. On Magic for Normies, it's me and Pixie Kitten. We do, a podcast talking all about Magic and more of a lot of the casual side of stuff. We don't get too deep into stuff like this, but sometimes we do. Because I find this sort of stuff interesting. But I was really wanting to ask this question because when Innistrad Midnight Hunt came out, this Daybound Nightbound mechanic felt really unintuitive, felt pretty complex. And while if you're just an arena-only player, a lot of these mechanics aren't going to seem that complex because Arena does it for you. But we're mainly talking about paper Magic only because both Magic Arena and Magic the Gathering Online do the mechanics for you automatically. Now, they're not always perfect. It may feel wrong, etc., but, there's not much thought behind it to make sure you're doing it correctly. So I decided to try to do a little bit of research into trying to find out, has this game actually become more complex over the years? So I want to ask, what do we mean by more complex? We're really talking about gameplay or mechanics that feel unintuitive and mechanics and gameplay that are hard to teach or learn. Now, Magic the Gathering is a complex game overall. That is not to say that the game itself is easy. It has a lot of basic rules, especially for someone who's brand new to Magic who joins. It can seem very, very, very hard and complex. But for players such as myself that have been playing for a long time, and even players who are still relatively new, who've only been playing maybe 3 to 5 years, it does feel like it's getting a little bit more complex. And with mechanics that still feel a little bit unintuitive when we're focusing on paper. So what am I trying to say here? I am deducing by my little bit of super scientific research that Magic the Gathering has become a more complex game within the past 2 years. There we go. All right, slide change. I was trying to click it like, come on, go. So yes, I am saying for the past 2 years, Magic has become more complex. So how did we come to this conclusion here? So pretty simple. I looked at every single standard set from Innistrad up until Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Now, I did not look at non-standard sets, meaning masters sets, commander sets, modern horizon sets. I did not look at any of those because a lot of times those are either geared for multiplayer, those are a lot of reprints, maybe some new cards put in them, but I really just wanted to focus on standard itself because once we sort of introduce a lot of the commander decks, things might get a little bit overblown with mechanics, or bloated, I should say. There is a good argument to include those, but I really just wanted to look at the standard sets themselves. So like I said, we looked at every set from Innistrad up until Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Yes, by the time this comes out, it'll be, close to Crimson Vow coming out, but we just didn't get a chance to really include it in this episode's research here. We looked at all new and returning mechanics in each standard set. We produced 2 categories to define if a set's mechanic was simple or complex. So we really divided these into 2 categories here, simple and complex here. So what do we mean by a simple mechanic? A simple mechanic, what I considered, is a mechanic considered intuitive and requires little understanding or memorization. If X happens, then do Y. Here are some examples of what I consider to be simple mechanics: flashback, convoke, landfall, cycling. A lot of them have very simple uses of how to use those mechanics. Flashback being when it's in the graveyard, you pay its flashback cost and you do the thing. With Convoke, you tap your creatures in order to cast the spell. Landfall, as soon as a land enters the battlefield, Y happens. Cycling, you pay the cycling cost and do the thing. Most of the times drawing a card or something else, regardless. So those are some examples of simple mechanics that I sort of researched from Innistrad up until Midnight Hunt to sort of give you all a baseline on what we mean by simple mechanics. Now, what about a complex mechanic? A complex mechanic is something that is unintuitive and requires a little bit more memorization here. Has many different rules interactions that are not easy to glean from the mechanic reminder text alone. Now, here are some great examples of complex mechanics. Companions, mutate, modal double face cards, and daybound and nightbound. Now, for each of these, they have some of these have been nerfed to the ground. Companions. Mutate is a very good example of a mechanic that I personally really, really, really love. But let's face it, there are a lot of use cases for mutate that are very, very complex. That even to this day, when I'm playing my Otrimi mutate deck, I still have a lot of questions about, well, if I mutate this on top of this, what happens with XYZ, right? There's still a lot of those questions there that still, even as a more veteran seasoned player as myself, I'm still having trouble trying to understand it all. Modal double face cards, I included those. Now, on the surface, they seem pretty easy, but, they can be a little bit complicated or complex depending on the card and which card face do you play, or can you only play the front facing card and then flip it, etc., etc. There's a lot of use cases where it may not always be, completely intuitive just from the card itself. And daybound nightbound is another great mechanic that feels very unintuitive. A good use case that I noticed, and like I said, this is just more of a very small sample size and very subjective, is when I play Innistrad Sealed or Innistrad Draft, and by this I mean Midnight Hunt, Daybound Nightbound is pretty easy to follow in paper because both of you are most likely having Daybound Nightbound cards that you both have to keep track of. What gets a little bit complicated is when we introduce that mechanic to a multiplayer setting, such as Commander. So if you are the only person playing the werewolf deck in Midnight Hunt Tolvar or something, and you have to keep track of Daybound Nightbound, that might get a little bit more complicated because now you're having to use your focus on not just what is happening on your board, but everybody else's board, and paying attention to the fact that, did they cast a spell? Did they cast 2 spells? All right, what happens if XYZ happens? And what about this use case if I play this card interacting with Daybound Nightbound? That's where things can get a little bit more complicated at that point. And Companions, while it's a deck building restriction mechanic, Companions themselves can still be a little bit confusing for new players, such as, when can I cast the Companion? I don't think on the reminder text Companions even have that you have to pay 3 mana just to get them out of the command zone and into your hand. I'm pretty sure they don't, because it's already automatically done in Magic Online and Magic Arena, but on paper, for someone new, they may not even know that. So that can be a little unintuitive as well, too. So what were our findings overall? When we looked at all of Innistrad until Midnight Hunt, how many mechanics did we really consider were complex? What was the number of that compared to just the past 2 years? And that number was from Ikoria and onwards. I am stating or hypothesizing that Magic has become more complex. Now, that is stating in my research that there have been 9 complex mechanics introduced or returned in a little over a 2-year span, compared to 7 complex mechanics introduced or returned from Innistrad up until Theros Beyond Death. So I want to quickly go over what were these mechanics, these 9 mechanics that were complex from Ikoria and onwards. And they are, let me pull up my list here. They are Mutate, Companions, Keyword Counters, all from Ikoria, 3 from Ikoria. So Ikoria was found to be one of the most complicated sets within recent history. Magic 2021 introduced phasing. Zendikar, Kaldheim, Strixhaven, and pretty much forward introduced modal double face cards. So that's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then Adventures in Forgotten Realms, Dungeons. And then dice rolling mechanics. And then Daybound, Nightbound, and Coven. Now, how did I come to these conclusions? Because some of you may be thinking, well, these aren't really that complicated, right? Like keyword counters, they aren't that complicated. But on paper, it gets a little bit more complicated because you have to keep track of that. So when you give not a companion, but a creature a lifelink counter, you're now going to have to keep track of that lifelink counter. Okay? On phasing's been a mechanic for a very long time. But let's be honest, for a new player, phasing is not that simple. It's still a pretty complex mechanic that it's gone, it doesn't exist, but it does come back. But when does it come back? Sometimes it's not that straightforward. And we talked about modal double face cards, dungeons. Dungeons are a brand new mechanic from the Adventures in Forgotten Realms set that can be very complicated on paper, because as soon as you choose a dungeon, you have to basically keep track of where you are in the room, what you've done, make sure you keep track of that, make sure you don't get lost. Oh, did I complete the dungeon? I don't remember, etc., etc., etc. And dice, while the dice rolling itself isn't that complex, it does add another layer of complexity of, all right, I rolled a dice, what happens, XYZ, okay, now it's just more stuff that you have to focus on. Daybound, Nightbound, we sort of went over. And Coven just meaning you're having to keep track of, three or more creatures with different powers. compared to only 7 complex mechanics that have been introduced from Innistrad up until Theros Beyond Death. And what were those? Pulling up my list right here now. I've got like this whole long sheet of... I literally wrote down every single mechanic that was introduced or returned in every single set and wrote what it did. So Soulbound from Avacyn Restored. Even to this day, there's still a few questions of how this exactly works, right? Evolve is something that can be complex to keep track of. Cypher from Gatecrash. So Gatecrash had Evolve and Cypher. Devotion from Theros is a pretty complex mechanic because, once again, you're having to keep track of more stuff as you're playing. Do you see a pattern here? It's what is really considered complex is when you're having to keep track of more stuff, having your attention divided besides just focusing on, attacking the player at hand. After that, we've got, for a good while there was a lot of the mechanics were pretty simple. Up until Ixalan, where they had Explore. Explore, even though it does exactly what it tells you on the card, it's still one of those, when you reveal the top card, you're like, oh, what do I got to do again? Oh, okay. Or having to remember to explore. What does it do again? Just having to constantly remember how it works. And I considered static abilities on Planeswalkers to be another complex mechanic. While in and of itself is very simple, it's once again having to keep track of it. And then the last one, did I only have 6? Did I lie to you all that there was only 6? Apparently so. I guess I lied to you. Evolve, Cypher, Soulbound. Yeah. Oh, Bestow. That's right, from Theros as well, too, I considered complex. Because it's very similar to Soulbound, and you sort of get confused on similar, like if you try to cast it as Bestow, then they kill the creature, what happens? All right. I should have been more prepared, right? I'm good at this stuff. And welcome to my TED Talk. Yeah, we're good. We're professionals here. We're professionals. So, what does this mean for Magic the Gathering? I mean, that's really a question in and of itself. Like, is this a good thing for Magic the Gathering? It's sort of a yes and no answer, right? Because a lot of the mechanics that come out now, it is getting to be more complex. It's getting to be more, not complex in the way that it's hard. It's getting more complex for memorization. And the rules text soup that is coming on cards. And what I mean by that is when there is a mechanic and it has the rules reminder text of it, and it's just this long, almost like few sentences on a little card, and you have to read it just to try to remember, right? So, and I think it's also a bad thing as well, because it may turn off new players who are getting a little bit overwhelmed. But as I said, there's a caveat with that. With games, not games, but with programs like Magic Arena and Magic Online, it makes it much, much, much easier to learn and get used to these mechanics. To where if you do make the transition to paper, boom, you sort of have a baseline for how this mechanic should work, right? It may not be perfect, but you have an understanding of it. So that about wraps up my Magic the Gathering TED Talk here. What did you think? Do you feel like Magic the Gathering has become more complex? Or is it just sort of feels like the same old, same old? I want to hear from you. Definitely, you can reach out to me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all those if you want to reach out and talk to me about it. Or you can email me at mtgzuby@gmail.com, or comment below on the YouTube video and make sure to like and subscribe it, and smash that bell, smash that face, smash that whatever, and let me know what you think. And thank you again for watching and listening, and I hope you all have a great night.